Sponsoring today's podcast is Datadog, a cloud-scale monitoring and security platform. Datadog integrates with more than 450 technologies, including Cloud Foundry, Docker, Kubernetes, and Kafka, so you can get deep visibility into every layer of your applications and infrastructure, in the cloud, on-premises, in containers, or wherever they run. With rich dashboards, machine learning-powered alerts, and distributed request tracing, Datadog helps engineering teams resolve issues quickly and release new features faster to market. Start monitoring your dynamic cloud infrastructure today with a 14-day trial. Listeners of this podcast will also get a free t-shirt for trying Datadog. Check it out at datadoghq.com/Hanselminutes. That's datadoghq.com/Hanselminutes. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking with Dan Walmsley. He's been working on Avalonia, a cross-platform UI framework, for many years, and it's seeing a lot of great success. How are you, Dan?
Hey, Scott. Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so, I was looking back at the podcast, and on episode 684 in May of 2019, we had Stephen Kirk on to talk about Avalonia. So that was 3 years ago. How long has Avalonia been a thing?
Yeah, it started quite a long time. I think it's 8, coming up to 9 years. I think the first commits were in like 2014 or 15. No, earlier.
Yeah, you might have a 10-year anniversary coming up here soon for Avalonia.
Yeah, it's not too far away.
Yeah, and I recall, but do you recall why is it called Avalonia? What is Avalon?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So Avalonia, it's kind of got its roots in WPF. And when WPF was being developed by Microsoft, its code name was Avalon. So Avalonia is kind of like a nod to WPF's roots and where Avalonia picks its roots from. Nice.
And WPF, of course, the Windows Presentation Foundation, the UI framework underneath a lot of .NET, and Avalon, the island that King Arthur went to recover from his wounds, and he ate a bunch of apples there. So it's all at the root is Avalon, and Avalonia springs from that, which is great. I recently noticed that there was a blog post that surprised me at github.blog that the Git credential manager, which is a fantastic thing that everybody should install. Basically, anytime Git is asking for credentials, it pops up a dialog box, and we don't think about those dialog boxes. But they needed to run everywhere. They needed to run cross-platform, and it's using Avalonia. Were you surprised by that blog post, as I was?
Yeah, I only found out about that a few days ago. The blog post came out, and I saw somebody tweeted the Avalonia account. And I didn't actually know anything about this beforehand, so it was really a nice surprise to see that.
It says here that Git Credential Manager has always offered graphical authentication prompts on Windows, but thanks to our adoption of the Avalonia project, they now have graphical prompts on Mac OS and Linux. And they call out something specific, and this is what I want to dig into. It's cross-platform XAML. So there's lots of ways to do cross-platform. We see Electron, we see, different cross-platform systems. What is it about Avalonia? Like, what's your fundamental root that you believe in? It's XAML, isn't it?
Yeah. So Avalonia, the primary kind of development model is very much like WPF. You write the UI using XAML, which is like XML or HTML at its extensible application markup language. And it gives you a nice, clean, declarative way to describe your UI and its layout. And then you can use these things called bindings to connect the data from your application to the UI.
The bindings in Avalonia and WPF before it, that was really the secret sauce that I always thought. Like being able to say when this text box changes, that text box changes without having to go and write all of the left-hand, right-hand code. I think that's the power of XAML in this context, don't you think?
Yeah. Many years ago when I first got into WPF, before that I was a WinForms guy, and I was used to the WinForms model, and when WPF first came out, I didn't fully grasp that difference. So I was kind of using WPF like in a WinForms way. And then when I finally discovered their bindings, it's like, wow, okay, mind blown. It totally decouples the actual UI from the business logic. And for me, I got bitten by that bug. So,
and it's carried you this far. So WPF is Windows Presentation Foundation, with Windows as that first letter, that first word. But Avalonia has always been cross-platform from its original inception. Let me ask you this. If I go and say file new project and I make a WPF app, do I simply open up the WPF app as an Avalonia app, or do I have to change something? Like, what's the difference between a WPF app and an Avalonia app?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's not quite as simple as that. Early on, we kind of took a decision. Should we be 100% compatible with WPF, or should we stay with the WPF APIs where it makes sense? Or should we change some APIs where to make them better suited to cross-platform? So in some ways, we have diverged a little bit. So you can't take a WPF project and just retarget it and recompile it. And however, most of the code you can copy and paste, and with some minor changes like the namespaces, some of the property names, a lot of the code you can very easily port to Avalonia. And if you have worked with WPF, you're going to find it very, very familiar. There won't really be much of a learning curve to transition.
15, 16 years ago, I wrote a WPF application for my son called Baby Smash. And it was written originally, I think, in .NET 3.5, and then sat around on .NET 4 for a number of years. And then just recently, we used the .NET Upgrade Assistant to bring it up to .NET 5 and then 6. And it shows shapes and characters, and it sings and dances, and it goes full screen, and it calls a couple of native APIs. It tries to lock the hotkeys and things like that. Could I bring Baby Smash cross-platform for Mac and Linux with Avalonia?
Yeah, I believe it shouldn't be too difficult. Yeah, maybe after this, I should have a look at the repo and have a look at the code. Maybe I'll send you a pull request or something.
That would be super fun. Yeah, it's up on GitHub. The reason that I ask that is that apps like this span the gamut. There can be text boxes over data. They can have cool controls and grids and stuff like this, or they can just draw on the screen like I'm doing. They could be games and things like that. I suppose that Avalonia doesn't really care what the app does. It cares if the XAML is good.
Yeah, sure. Avalonia has the same rendering APIs as WPF. So if on WPF you're drawing a circle or a square, it's the same. It works in the same way. If it's like a XAML to declare a shape and to position that shape on the screen, it works in exactly the same way. So
interesting. But if I draw a button or a list box, does it look like a Mac list box, or does it look like a Windows list box, or does it look the same everywhere? There's a lot of conversations around cross-platform. I want a button and a list and some controls. Should it look the same everywhere, or should it adapt? What's Avalonia's philosophy?
Sure. So there's kind of two schools of thought. Some people would like cross-platform, where when it's on a Mac, it really looks like you get the native Mac button, and when it's on Windows, you get the native Windows button. We basically have, I call it lookless controls. All of our controls are drawn from templates. So there is no native button. So when you draw the button, and if you decide to style it in your own way, it will look pixel perfect, exactly the same on any of the platforms that Avalonia runs on.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I like that luckless, meaning that it's going to look the way you expected. There's no surprises involved with Avalonia. It's going to look great everywhere.
Yeah. Although Avalonia comes with like a built-in theme, technically there's no standard look for any control. You can write some XAML to put a template on all your buttons or your list boxes and make them look how you want them to look.
Are you saying luckless or lookless?
Lookless controls. There's no standard
look
to the
less.
control.
I just made a new thing. We just invented a new thing because I misunderstood. It's both, you don't require luck to look amazing, but it's lookless because you're saying that the controls have a theming engine on top of them.
Yeah, sure. If you think about, there's like applications like everybody knows Slack, right? These days, Slack has a very distinctive look. The kind of branding of the company is throughout the whole user interface. Avalonia is kind of a framework. If you had that kind of application where you wanted 100% customization of your UI, that's where it's really strong.
Okay, so you're saying that I could go and have these lookless controls in my application, and I could have a half dozen themes out of the box, and my application could look like my corporate style, the way that I want my application to look. We could input like almost like cascading style sheets, except for a native application.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing that you mentioned there, the cascading style sheets. It's one of the major differences between WPF. So we have styles the same way that WPF is, but we have this property called selector, and you can type in the same syntax that you would with cascading style sheets. So you can apply styles to any part of your UI. So with just a few styles, you can completely change the look and feel of your application, very much like you can in the web world.
Wow. So that really feels like an upgrade. I know that some people have said Avalonia is a copy or a clone of WPF, but you have taken the inspiration, but then taken it in a different way, and you've added upgrades. Avalonia is an upgrade of WPF in some ways.
Yeah, I like to think about it as if, imagine if WPF, if it was being developed today, it must be 15 years, 20 years since WPF. It's a completely different world now. The technologies have moved on and some of the concepts. How would you build WPF today to be cross-platform? So yeah, in those, there's many places where we've brought in new ways of doing things to make things easier, or technologies that people or concepts that people will be more familiar with.
Yeah, so it's WPF through a modern lens, and with all of the trappings of that. So you said that they are lookless, but you said that you're painting directly. So these are not controls that are a native button control. It's what they call owner draw. I'm curious, what library are you using underneath that? What's putting the pixels on the screen? Is it Skia, which is the Google Skia graphics library?
Avalonia is not tied to any particular renderer, so you can actually switch them in and out. But the main one that we use is Skia. And we also have, you can change a configuration setting, change it to Direct 2D. The idea was that we didn't want to tie it to any particular technology, because as time moves on, then you can switch things out and upgrade things. And that's led to some interesting scenarios where people who are using Avalonia, they've been able to swap out the rendering system. They've been able to integrate into game engines. So you have like, I can't remember exactly which one it is, because I don't know much about the games industry, but I think, is it called?
Well, there's Monogame, and there's Unity, there's...
Yeah, it may be the Unity one. People have done experiments. So, it's like a game, and you're moving through a 3D world, and then there's like a piece of the game, like a wall in the game, and it's got Avalonia controls rendered onto it.
Oh, wow. Like you really could do anything.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is an example of nobody ever imagined or designed Avalonia to do that. But there's a huge community out there, and people do things that you don't even imagine that is possible.
That's so prescient, though, to think about. Like, we'll make the graphics renderer itself, the thing that puts pixels on the screen. We're going to make sure that that's pluggable, because you just never know, and that is paid off. That little bit of insurance is paid off, because it's going to allow you to be future proofed.
Yeah. So at the beginning, we kind of the people that started Avalonia, there was a few of us. We all somehow came together on GitHub at the same time, and we all really loved WPF, but we just wanted it to run on Linux and Mac and be cross-platform. And back then, it was completely different scenario. There really were not that many options available for cross-platform desktop UIs. But what we did know was that WPF, from having a look into how it works and trying to figure out, it was very heavily tied to one particular renderer, Direct2D, and that obviously made it very difficult for WPF to be made cross-platform, to be brought to Linux, because it was so dependent on that. And now that WPF is open source, you can see in the code it's very, very tied to Windows and Direct2D. So because we could see that was the case, even before we could see the code, we chose early on to make sure that we wouldn't tie our platform to any particular technology.
At the end of the day, your customer has to be at the center of everything you do. This starts with the right customer data strategy, as well as the right foundation to solve the challenges that typically inhibit the success of your company, such as data quality, data governance, and connectivity. mParticle is your real-time customer data infrastructure that helps you accelerate your data strategy by cleansing, visualizing, and integrating your customer data from anywhere to anywhere. Ultimately, better data leads to better decisions, better customer experiences, and better outcomes. See why the best brands choose mParticle. Go to mparticle.com. That's mparticle.com. So we're talking about not tying our platform to a particular technology, but we want it to run cross-platform. If I'm going to take Baby Smash and we're going to go and import this over, the painting you've already said is pretty clear. Like, you want to draw shapes, you want to play sounds. Those things are pretty straightforward. But even something like playing sounds is going to call different native APIs. Do I have to go and pound define and detect? Am I detecting at runtime that I'm on Linux and I call a different API? Or am I doing that at compile time?
So Avalonia can't help with their playing sounds, but what most people tend to do with their applications is they'll have like maybe a sound interface, and you can provide an implementation. Basically, everything in .NET is available when you're using. You can use Avalonia for the API, so you can find ways to play sound cross-platform, or you can provide different implementations for the different platforms. We actually had a kind of an experiment to re-implement the old Zune player, to see if we could, how accurately we could reproduce a UI.
I have my Zune on my desk right here. I'm holding my Zune up. Yeah. So you made a Zune prototype, Zune not with a Z or a Z, but rather with an X, X-U-N-E. Is that something that you'll release or show people? Because it looks amazing. It looks exactly like I remember Zune looking.
Yeah, it's kind of, I did it with my friend Juma as a kind of experiment to see, can we reproduce, how accurately and how long would it take us to reproduce the API. And we found in .NET Core there was some libraries that could do cross-platform playing audio, so it proved that you could integrate Avalonia with any kind of cross-platform .NET API to play the audio. It's not finished because we're having the time to work on all of this stuff, but if anybody wants to help out, it's quite a good project potentially.
So when you are compiling, do you are making all three or as many targets as possible? You're making a Windows, a Mac, and a Linux all at the same time, and you basically get three different folders with three different apps?
Yeah, so when we have templates, so you can just use the .NET new command, and we'll give you a project for desktop, and the desktop project is a single project, but that covers Linux, Mac, and Windows. We create another folder for iOS, another folder for Android, and then we'll create another folder for web. And then we'll create another folder which has the actual cross-platform. So those other folders that I've mentioned before, they're like the bootstrap code that knows how to load the UI on iOS or on desktop.
You mentioned the browser, though. Where did that came out of nowhere? So you can generate browser apps as well, and how are you doing that?
We can, and that's also very new, kind of cutting edge at the moment. the project that we generate, it generates a Blazor project. So you can use all the Blazor goodness in there. You can mix it in and then use Avalonia to render the UI. And if you want, you can cut out all the Blazor and just use the HTML, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript to start up the UI. And it's kind of opens a lot of doors because people are creating like small Avalonia applications with demonstrations. You can just quickly put it on a website. Nobody has to download and install the application, which is really nice.
Now, a couple of months ago, someone on GitHub made a WPF Wordle clone. So, of course, you had to take up the challenge, which I appreciate. And you took a lot of that code and you made a Wordalonia, an Avalon Wordle clone that does desktop on any platform, browser, iOS, and Android. So you said that the browser side is Blazor, but you're painting with Avalonia, and then Avalonia is using the canvas rather than like how that's how it's painting out to the screen. It's basically swapped out the painting library for the canvas. How are you doing that?
Yeah, in the Blazor app, there's a control Avalonia view or something like that, and that basically has a web canvas, and that gets wired up to the Avalonia framework. Everything then just runs the same as it would be on desktop.
That's so freaking cool. I mean, think about that. Like, I'm just trying to help our audience get their brain around that. So you have a Blazor app with a control, like a grid or a button or an Avalonia, and you just have a whole Avalonia control, and then any existing Avalonia stuff would paint into that control, and you just go running. That's brilliant. Okay, so then how are you drawing on iOS and Android? Are those native apps or are those web views on the mobile applications?
On iOS and Android, they're native applications. They're using Skier as well to do the rendering.
That's awesome. And then do you need a Mac in order to build the iOS app?
Yes, you do. And I actually tried to find if there was any way, but it turns out that even to run the simulators, Apple makes sure that you've paid for a laptop or something like that.
Yeah, gotta pay the tax.
That's right.
That's absolutely amazing. All right, so then let's get to some of the hard questions here, because I think that I'm looking at this, and if someone is coming into the .NET community, they're going to say, "Oh, great, .NET Core is cross-platform. .NET 6 is now out. C# is open source. That's great. Avalonia is open source." But then there's existing Xamarin stuff. Xamarin is a platform from Microsoft that'll do some cross-platform like iOS. Then there's MAUI, the multi-application UI framework, which doesn't do Linux. Where does Avalonia sit in that world? It does things that the Microsoft frameworks don't do. But how do you see those frameworks either living together, or is it a co-opetition?
So I always say to everyone that all of these frameworks, they're all slightly different. They all take different approaches. Some more depending on what you're building or what you want to build. You should have a look at the differences and pick the best technology for your application. I see that Avalonia coexists with all of them, and compared to how the space was when we started Avalonia, it's a really great thing that there's now so many options and so much choice available.
Yeah, that's a really healthy attitude. I've been at Microsoft now for 15 years. When I got here, I was trying to open source everything, and I'm going to keep open sourcing stuff until they eventually fire me. But just thinking about, you're right, the kind of combative style of 20 years ago versus now, where you can literally say .NET new Avalonia.xplat, like at the command line, and it just pops out with everything that you need to run cross-platform apps effectively everywhere. I can't think of anywhere that it doesn't work. Is pretty freaking amazing. And this is production ready on desktop, right? This is not a toy. There are a ton of companies that are doing this, right?
Yeah, on desktop, we've basically been developing desktop for, as we were saying before, close to coming up to 10 years. So on desktop, it's super, super mature, super stable. Mm-hmm. There are many companies that have built very complicated applications that run on desktop. So right now, if if you are looking for a desktop platform, Avalonia is absolutely ready. On the mobile and website, it's very new, so I expect there's still some rough edges, but a lot of people are getting in there and trying it, and they come back to me and say, "Oh, how do we do this?" And so things are starting to get close to being production ready. So if you're the kind of person that likes to try new things, then absolutely. But if you're building an app for like a big corporation and it has to be solid already, maybe you might want to wait a few months.
For the mobile side only.
For the mobile and web size. So
Yeah.
we're going to release our 11.0 version in a few months, and at that point, that's when we will say that we're stable. But we won't say that we're stable until we're ready.
Okay. So the desktop side of Avalonia, absolutely production ready to go, mobile support and public preview. For those folks who are listening who may have done WPF in the past, or maybe you're old-timey desktop folks like me, the opportunity to reuse your existing skills, you're going to find this very comforting. It's like putting on a pair of comfortable shoes. Making an Avalonia app, when I look at it, I'm like, oh, okay, I know this. I've been here before. This is cool. And now you've even got Visual Studio extensions for XAML Previewer, and as well as JetBrains Writer support. So this really shines in an IDE, particularly, I think. So congratulations to you and the team for making that happen.
Yeah, so we support Visual Studio, of course. We're hoping to support Visual Studio Code very soon. We have somebody contributing a plugin, and Rider, because JetBrains have adopted Avalonia for a couple of their products. They wanted to have the very best IDE integration that they possibly could for their own team. So that was very lucky for us, because they have really built the support when you just open Rider and work on an Avalonia product. The refactorings that it give you, the IntelliSense and all those kind of things is basically second to none.
The other thing that's worth pointing out that I think the audience should know is that this is a very mature open source project, and you have recently been able to leave your job and you can do this full time now. So you can go to avaloniaui.net and get support. While it's a community project and there's free, if you're a startup or an enterprise, you can partner up with you all, can't you, Dan, and get commercial level support for your production apps.
That's right. It's been a long journey to get to this point. Many years of working on the project. But about 3 years ago, it became clear that people were adopting it and they needed support, and people were asking us, "Hey, can we pay you to fix this issue, or to give us some advice or help?" So as those requests became more and more, and recently now it's kind of an explosion. So we're fortunate enough that there's now several of us that are able to work on Avalonia full time, and it pays enough that we can survive.
I noticed as I was looking through your GitHub as well that Plastic SCM, the source code manager from Plastic, that's Avalonia as well. I never would have guessed. I just assumed it was written in C++.
Yeah, they have an interesting story. They contacted us a couple of years ago. They had a team, and they basically had some developers that worked on the Linux UI, and some developers working separately on the Windows UI, and some working on the Mac UI. And if they had to make a change, they had to make the change 3 times. And they looked at Avalonia and other technologies, and eventually they decided to go with Avalonia. And now the newest version of Plastic SCM is running on Avalonia. So all the team is now together. If they want to implement a feature, they just implement it once.
Yeah, one of the things that's really well known, just to shout out to our friends at plasticscm.com, that they're really well known for their visualizations. One of the things that they're unapologetic about is I've used Plastic before, and they've always been on the cutting edge of painting their branches and making an amazing visualizer. And they have no patience for ugly they have no patience for ugly, and it's absolutely gorgeous application. Which is a funny thing because every Avalonia app that I've seen is gorgeous. You actually were kind enough to send me a little demo video. Maybe you'll share it with our listeners, and we can have a link in the show notes. And it's just like gorgeous app after gorgeous app. Do you think designers will feel really comfortable making good looking applications with Avalonia?
Yeah, I think because as we were talking before about the controls being lookless, you can style them in any way. A designer can do a design on a tool like Figma and make a beautiful design. And if you know how to apply all the styling, it's never a problem to make it look exactly the same as it does on Figma. You can, add the corner radiuses of the button and make the colors exactly the same, and you can add shadows and things like this. So,
very cool. Well, thank you so much, Dan Walmsley, for chatting with me today, and all the best to the Avalonia team for this wonderful open source success story.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. It's been really great to talk to you. Thanks for having us on.
So you can check out Avalonia at avaloniaui.net. Look at the source code on their GitHub. They've got fantastic documentation and support. And this has been another episode of Hansel Minutes. We'll see you again next week.